Just ask any Spectrum fan, and I'm sure they'll point to Jetpac as being one of the first breakout hits for Uncle Clive's rubber-keyed beast. It's no surprise to see why, as its smooth visuals and frantic gameplay meant it stood head and shoulders above many of its peers of the time. It also inspired many a developer to create their own takes over the years, with Super JetPak DX being the latest to join that illustrious group. Is it odd to be covering it now? Perhaps. But with orders being taken for a third physical run of cartridges, I felt it was as good a time as any to sit down and give it a video or so you could decide for yourself whether it's worth grabbing to play. For those not familiar with Jetpac, your task here is simply to fuel up your ship by collecting and dropping off the fuel capsules which slowly arrive. On each odd numbered stage, before you can do that, you'll first need to assemble the ship before you can fuel it up. Both of these tasks are handled in the same way. Fly into an item to pick it up, then fly over the rocket to release them. It's not a deep set of mechanics, but it was designed for a fairly limited machine by 1983 standards, so cut it some slack. Once you've collected enough fuel tanks, indicated by the fuel gauge on the top of the screen, it's time to hop on board and fly off into the stars, or the next stage. If only that was all there was to it. The big challenge comes from surviving the enemies swarming about. It's also where Super JetPak DX diverges from its inspiration in several ways. That is it with the enemies themselves. Sure, they're going to cause a spot of bother when you start out, at least until you get used to each stage's patterns. It's something I feel isn't quite helped by the small play area afforded by the Game Boy, and their general movement pace. But once you have an understanding on how to tackle them, surviving is certainly possible. Its first difference is actually the weapon management, as unlike Jetpac, you can't hold down that fire button for continuous laser blasting. No, you've only got a limited supply of energy which slowly recharges, so managing your usage is important. Because you don't want to experience the horror of your blaster running dry at an inopportune moment, am I right? What really helps are the power-ups you can collect. These drop from the sky like bonus collectibles and will give you additional weapons, an additional shot which fires above you, or one fires behind you, or perhaps an orbiting drone helping you with an extra shot as well. You can also get a bubble shield that lets you take an additional hit from an enemy before you'll die. One pickup I found incredibly, and I mean incredibly helpful, because of how fast those enemies move about at times. It's not all sunshine and lollipops though, as you'll also get some pickups which offer negative effects. So you don't want to rush and collect everything which drops from the sky, as you might not want to reverse your controls or encounter a sudden explosive kaboom. So even if it's a beneficial power-up, sometimes you just want to retain what you've got anyway. As you progress through its 16 levels, the map layouts will change, with some offering more challenge than others to work your way through. Enemies also pose an increased threat due to how they'll move about too. Using the screen wraparound to your advantage becomes more and more important, so you can sneak through any breaks in their patterns and get things done without losing a life. Now it sounds tough, and it might be when you get started, but this is a game which can be beaten. You have 5 lives to start out with, and 5 continues are on offer. So even if you ratchet the difficulty up to its highest level, with a bit of practice, you should be able to make it through. All of this is something I feel sets up a neat goal for long-term play. Sure, you could reach the end of the game, but can you do it on a single credit? Learning the mechanics and levels and patterns well enough to accomplish that is really where I think the fun stands with Super JetPak DX. It's also the type of detail I feel helps make a game stand out, even when you're remaking a classic, as is the case here. There's really just one last detail I want to get into before we wrap things up, and that's compatibility. Super JetPak DX is designed for the Game Boy Color, and though I've not played it on an actual Game Boy Color, I've mainly been using my analog pocket for it, it's quite vibrant in how it looks. Even on a Game Boy Advance with, less than optimal screen, i.e. an original one, it's still pretty decent in action. It is also compatible with the original Game Boy. And I've got to be honest here, I don't think I can recommend it if that's the only way you can play it. The lower colour palette, which the original hardware offers, led to some design choices that I feel impacted readability. I'm showing it here running off a Super Game Boy, and a palette that tries to mimic the original. And yeah, just some of those pickups, I found it hard to read. I'm not sure what it'd be like if you were trying to play this on an original Game Boy with an unmodified screen. I think it might just be a bit too much to even attempt. But no matter. Should you own a Game Boy Color or Game Boy Advance or an appropriate alternate system, and you've got that rocket building and refueling shaped hole in your life, then Super JetPak DX is well, and I mean well, worth checking out. Even though there's a limited time to secure a copy in this latest run, I think there might be 2 or so weeks left by the time this goes out, you do have the option of just buying the ROM if you're not one for that physical cartridge life, or you have other ways you want to play it. Yes, it's not a game you're going to be engrossed with for the longest period of time. Rather, it's one you'll dive into and out of as you feel like, especially if you're just after a quick fix. Plus, it serves as a neat tribute to a Spectrum classic, and for me that's always a great thing in my book, so do check it out if it sounds like your thing. And with that, nothing more for me to say than to thank you all very much for watching.